Section 5. Is consciousness epiphenomenal? Given that animals may have qualia, Gray then starts looking for explanations as to why evolution should have selected for this. He firstly points out that the existence of animal qualia would rule out a large number of false leads. For example, James's suggestion that consciousness began with the Greeks, or that consciousness requires human language, or that its survival value by way of sexual selection lies in its contribution to specifically human intelligence or artistic sensitivity. Any theory, in other words, that requires specifically human abilities. But as Gray points out, we are still left with the puzzle of finding a function for conscious experience, one, moreover, that has sufficient behavioral power to have ensured its Darwinian selection. He says, quote, "We failed to find it in the kind of rapid online behavior needed to avoid a predator, which takes place too fast for consciousness to come into it. And it is unlikely that the female cat, rat, or even monkey picks her mate for the quality of his conscious life. So where does that leave us? We should leave no stone unturned. Thus, we shall have to take seriously even the possibility that consciousness actually has no real function, that it is an epiphenomenon. I confess that I find this solution deeply unattractive, but it has been proposed by some eminent thinkers." End quote. In considering an epiphenomenal view of qualia, Gray comments that this would make consciousness, as it were, only half involved in causality. Quote, "It is caused, but has no further causal effects of its own." End quote. A famous analogy for this, first proposed by Thomas Huxley, is the whistle on a steam locomotive. Steam in a steam-powered locomotive plays a causal role in driving the train's wheels. Excess steam is blown off through the funnel, making a whistling sound. This sound plays no part in powering the train, though it is caused by the same events that do power it. Gray says that, quote, "In the same way, epiphenomenalists suppose that conscious experiences are caused by the same brain processes that drive our behavior, but do not themselves add to the causal effects of those processes." End quote. Gray observes that if this analogy is true, there is not much more, scientifically speaking, to say about qualia. So adopting epiphenomenalism enables one to give up on the hard problem. But Gray adds it's too early to give up. Quote, "Science has only committed itself to serious consideration of the problem within the last couple of decades. To find causal powers for conscious events will not be easy, but the search should be continued. And if it leads us back to dualism, so be it." End quote. But, Gray insists, the epiphenomenalist position cannot be dismissed so lightly. A major question concerns the role of qualia in brain processes which appear simultaneously to give rise to them while discharging other functions. Gray uses the example of competitive tennis. Modern neuroscience tells us that a professional player will see his opponent's serve only after he has returned it. In other words, the player's return stroke is fully accounted for by the brain's unconscious sensory motor functions. So what role does the player's perception of his opponent's serve play in his return stroke? In other words, what function does this qualia have in the player's response? An extreme epiphenomenalist position would answer nothing. Gray's detailed suggestion as to an explanation for qualia is late error detection, which we'll look at later. But in relation to the simple analogy of the locomotive's whistle, Gray points out that the whistle may provoke comments and might even make you whistle too. So the whistle's melody has some causal effects, even though it doesn't contribute to the powering of the train. Gray also points out some of the absurd consequences of an extreme epiphenomenalist position. He says, for example, that, quote, books about the problem of consciousness could not be written if conscious experiences had no causal effects, for their production is one such effect. Philosophers have speculated that zombies with no conscious experience might nevertheless develop the behavioral capacities that allow them to write such books. I shall, however, ignore this bizarre speculation. More generally, neither language nor artistic creation, at least as we know them, would be possible without qualia, end quote. Within an evolutionary context, the epiphenomenalist argument would require that consciousness is simply a byproduct that makes no contribution to survival and reproduction. Gray imagines a series of genetic mutations which change brain functions and consequently enhance survival. He further supposes that these mutations also lead to some new form of conscious experience. Gray says that, quote, the increase in survival value requires changes in behavior. The individual might run faster to escape a predator, mate more successfully, etc. These changes can be fully accounted for by the brain processes and their output in behavior, to which the new mutations give rise. Therefore, the accompanying conscious experiences do not contribute in their own right to the enhanced survival value. They just come along for the ride, end quote. But Gray is not satisfied that this is all there is to consciousness. However, the majority of conventional psychologists are very much committed to this view.